thrombotic complications of COVID-19, which is very appropriate in the current context of our discussions. And at the outset, we are extremely thankful to each one of you for accepting our invitations and making this program possible and successful for tonight. Dear Doctor, 2020 is the year when Mankind Pharma has successfully completed 25 years of its journey in the pharmaceutical industry. Way back in 1995, when we started our first operations in northern part of the country, our vision has been to become the most admired Indian pharmaceutical company. And keeping that visions in mind, today Mankind is the fourth largest Indian pharma house, with the rank number one in terms of the prescriptions written by the doctor. And towards that, we are extremely thankful to each one of you for your support and the encouragements, without which it would have never been possible to reach this pinnacle of success over a period of last few decades. Today, Mankind has expanded its reach to each and every corner of the India as well as abroad. We have expanded our manufacturing capabilities. Today, we are having 21 state-of-art WHO FDA compliant manufacturing units at the various parts of the country. And we have also made our major footprints in the global market, including our 34 countries where we are having our commercial presence. Around 3 years before, we have started our first operations in US and Latin America, and also last year we have started our operations successfully in European Union. Our Mankind state-of-art R&D capabilities has made us to achieve and enter into a certain new segments of the new product identifications and the new chemical entity in anti-diabetics, in rheumatoid arthritis, and few other new chemical entity identifications and the clinical research unit as a whole. Dear Doctor, it is a moment of great pride for all of us to say that our endeavor and our commitment to partner with the healthcare professionals has taken a great shape, and towards that, we are extremely thankful to each one of you. But at the same time, we strongly do believe that leadership doesn't mean that it is only the earning and reaching certain positions by overall top line revenue. But at the same time, we must do and contribute certain things for our nations and for our citizens at the time of the crisis. Hence, when this COVID-19 pandemic has cropped up globally as well as it created a national crisis, we are one of the forerunner in the industry where each and every employee at Mankind contributed our one-day salary. And towards that, we have substantially contributed to the Chief Minister's and the Prime Minister's Relief Fund. The objective of these contributions and the donations was to take care of and to support all the essentials, food, medicines, ventilator, the personal protective gears for the patients, and all the staff member in all those states which are most badly affected due to this pandemic. And with these small attributes, we always wanted to give the contributions and also wanted to recognize the efforts through our true heroes. And we do strongly believe that our true heroes are nothing but all the doctors, all the healthcare workers, paramedical staffs, and everybody who are day in and day out working to hard, and they are putting untiring, relentless effort to fight against this pandemic over the period of time. With these few words, may I once again congratulate, and we are extremely thankful to each one of you for accepting our invitation. And with these few words, we are extremely delighted to introduce to you today our distinguished panel of the faculty members. Our distinguished speaker for today evening is Professor Dr. N.N. Khanna, a senior intervention cardiologist and group advisor in cardiology and intervention cardiology from Apollo Group of Hospitals, New Delhi. Along with Dr. Khanna, we are having a very eminent and distinguished panel members who are going to chair these particular sessions. To begin with, we are having Professor Dr. Soumitra Rai, a senior intervention cardiologist and director of invasive cardiology, AMRI Kolkata. Professor Dr. P.V. Jayagopal, director, HOD, and senior intervention cardiologist from Palakkad, and Dr. Rajiv D. Karnik from Mumbai. And Dr. Rajiv Karnik, as we all are very well aware that we are having Dr. Karnik is working as a director, heart failure clinic and intervention cardiologist, Fortis Hospital, Mulund, Mumbai. He is a unique distinctions of the topping University of Bombay at all the medical degrees of exams and the secured 6 gold medals. Dr. Karnik is awarded the Commonwealth scholarships in UK, invited at Mayo Clinic US as a visiting clinicians, and fellow of European College of European Society of Cardiology, and premium professional member from American Heart Associations and many other eminent societies across the world, a very, very eminent, distinguished senior cardiologists and eminent academicians and the speaker. With these few words, I just would like to request Dr. Karnik to start the scientific sessions and kindly do introduce your other two other distinguished co-chairpersons and Dr. Khanna and start the scientific process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Sandeep Mitra, for a very kind introduction. Now, let me start the conference officially, which is thrombotic complications of the COVID-19, which is very, very pertinent in the current status. Before we start the conference, let me invite my two co-chairpersons. And first is Professor Soumitra Ray. Professor, yes, you can see, I think the slide is shared. He's professor at Vivekananda Institute of Medical Sciences. He's director of invasive cardiology at Emory, Kolkata. Vice President of Central Cardiological Society of India. After MD, he had done Royal College of Physicians membership in UK. And one very peculiar thing, he has never left the first rank right from 12th standard HSC. In all the exams, he has stood first. I mean, very, very brilliant personality. I'm very glad that he's a chairperson. We have got such a brilliant chairperson. And another very brilliant academician is Dr. P.B. Jayagopal. Many of you may have already heard and known him, that he's a very dynamic and very academic person. He's a director and head of the department at and senior interventional cardiologist at Lakshmi Hospital. He is vice president of Indian College of Cardiology. He was principal investigator for heart failure registry in ICC, Indian College of Cardiology. Co-investigator in several international trials. I mean, very, very many landmark trials, I would say. And he is on the editorial board of Indian Heart Journal. So a great academician, Dr. Jayagopal. I welcome you also, as both of you, Dr. Professor Soumitra Ray and Jayagopal. Both of you are very welcome. And now let us come to the star of the day, who is the guest speaker, Dr. Narendra Khanna. He is a man, a terrific orator, very excellent. I mean, you will hear him very shortly. He is a group advisor for Apollo Group of Hospitals all over the India. Past president of Indian College of Cardiology in 2018-19. He was chairman of NIC and CSI 2016-17. Chairman of Asia Pacific Vascular Society, President of Interventional Society for Endovascular Specialists. He is on the editorial board of Indian Heart Journal, Journal of Indian College of Cardiology, and then as well as the very coveted, most well-known and well-read Journal of American College of Cardiology and American Journal, Heart Journal, and several other journals. He is on the reviewer board who reviews all the articles, and he is director of World Federation of Cardiac Imaging as well as clinical cardiology. He looks at the cardiac patients not only from outside in clinical cardiology, but he looks inside the vessels also. So he has so many coveted feathers about endovascular specialty. So we have really a very good panel for discussion. And with this, let me open this today's very important session on thrombotic complications of COVID-19. Because many of us are aware that COVID, I mean, the main mortality, like any viral infection, I mean, it will have its toll. But then this is specifically which has become very serious because of its lung pathology and ARDS and then producing deaths. But then simultaneously, there are other organs also involved which sometimes go into a shadow. And then that is, of course, like, we know this ACE2 receptors are abundant in lungs, but they're also there in the heart and in the vessels also. And then there are the heart is many involved, the stroke incidence increases, the venous thromboembolism, thrombosis and thromboembolism increases. And we have such a best personality to speak about thrombosis, and that is Dr. Narendra Khanna. So without wasting much time, let me hand over to Professor Khanna, and let all of us get more knowledgeable and enlightened about this thrombosis in the event of COVID infection. Professor Khanna, please, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Soumitra Ray, Dr. Jayagopal, and Sandeep. Do you want me to present from here, or you have got my slides to play from here?
Yes, sir. I got your slides, so let me share my your slides.
Because every time I click on my slides, it shows it go off the screen.
Right, sir. Can you see?
Yeah. So you
Right.
can
Yeah.
the first two slides.
Yes, sir.
Talking about thrombosis and TIC COVID-19, were we on the right path so far? Can I go next, skip the next one and then go next? Next.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let me go back to some historical aspect. You know, when the COVID started as a pandemic, not a pandemic, but it was in China and then came up in Europe, especially in Italy and then Spain, and then in US. What was seen is that many patients, you know, we were thinking were dying of ARDS initially, but what happened is many of the intensivists actually discovered that, you know, when they were putting in lines, what was happening is these lines were getting clotted more often than, you know, they see in their day-to-day practice in an emergency room and in the intensive care. Not only that, you know, these patients were almost a little bit requiring a lot of heparin. And in spite of that, they were dying, and most of them were dying, you know, with sudden death. Sometimes related to heart failure and ventricular arrhythmia, sometimes related to or many a time because of acute pulmonary embolism. So this created a lot of you know, suspicion that something else is happening. It is not only the pneumonia and ARDS and cytokine storm which is responsible. It is probably something else. And then a series of autopsy and the relook at autopsies, you know, in all these three countries, in China and then Italy and Spain, actually they found that the common finding is that the incidence of DVT and pulmonary embolism is very high. The incidence of stroke as well as myocardial infarction is also very high. And about 30 to 40% of these patients who actually are present with ST elevation MI, when you do their angiogram, you find almost clear coronaries, but the flow is very, very slow. And it is the distal or, you know, distal myocardial arteries which are blocked. And similarly in the brain, it was the small, you know, striate arteries which are blocked. So this led to, you know, thinking that probably it's a thrombotic complication which is killing more patients rather than pneumonia or ARDS. And the use of ventilator may not be as important as the use of anticoagulation or thrombolytic agent. So let me then go with this background, let me start my talk. Solid data is still lacking, but go back. Solid data is lacking, but an emerging body of evidence suggests that COVID-19 may predispose patients both to arterial and venous thrombotic disease. Some of these therapies under investigation may pose distinct drug-to-drug interaction with common antithrombotic medications. So what was also seen, you know, now if you have a vitamin K antagonist and new antiviral drugs for treating COVID, they have a lot of interaction, and probably some other drugs are required, and VK may not be the drugs of choice. So let me go to the next slide. Consensus is that COVID-19 is a prothrombotic disease. So that is very important. It's been seen all across the world that not only, I mean, the blood itself of COVID patient is very prothrombotic. The lines is putting very frequently, and the patients have a lot of line blockages of these lines and thrombotic complications both on arterial and venous side. What is not known about this is the extent to which it promotes thrombosis and how do we manage this. So this is the main question for the last 1.5 months. And when we see these patients who have COVID and are admitted in the hospital, what we find that these patients are very sick anyway, and they have acute medical illness and it of itself which predisposes to venous stasis. So that means these patients actually are old, they are admitted, they are immobile, and this leads to the stasis of the blood. Also, there is a very extensive cytokine storm which damages both the endothelium in arteries and the veins, and this leads to an endothelial dysfunction. And there are a host of other things which predispose these patients to blood clots. However, what we are seeing is when we compare this cohort of patients with similar patients who are admitted in the hospital and are immobilized and are old, the risk of thrombotic complications are much more and the incidence is much more. So again, there is something more which happens here. Next. So this prompted a global effort to summarize what is known to date about preventing venous thromboembolism in patients with COVID-19 during hospitalization. So what is the ideal management of COVID-19 patients with a VTE diagnosis? So these were the two questions, and for this, go next. There was a consensus meeting, and it was published. The results were published in April 15, which is just about a month back, 2020, in the Journal of American College of Cardiology, and it reviews the highlights of the pathogenesis, epidemiology, treatment, and available outcome data related to thrombotic disease in patients of COVID-19. Hemostatic abnormalities consistently seen in patients with COVID-19 include mild thrombocytopenia, increased D-dimer levels, and both of which are associated with higher risk of needing mechanical ventilation, ICU admission, death, severity of COVID disease, and prolonged prothrombin and thrombin time. So, in other words, if you have a patient of COVID who's admitted in the hospital, and he presents with thrombocytopenia and increased D-dimer, be very careful, because these are the patients who are more likely to go and into ICU admission, require the need of mechanical ventilation, and probably these are the patients who would die. And these patients invariably have prolonged prothrombin and thrombin times. Next. Please go next. So this is just about how COVID attaches to the receptors in the blood. Go next. Now, if you see the autopsy specimen, you find these sort of pulmonary infarcts. And if you see the histology, what you see here, the histology here is a little different from the standard VTE. Not only that you have the major pulmonary arteries which are often blocked, but most often what happens is the smaller pulmonary arteries are blocked here. And they have thrombosis rather than the major ones. So these patients would have clear central pulmonary arteries and would have diffuse thrombosis in the peripheral pulmonary arteries. Many a times what was also seen on X-ray pictures as, distal opacities were actually related to this thrombotic complication and alveolar destruction, and then secondary alveolitis and infection there. Next, please. So with this background, let's see what is the mechanism of thrombosis and thrombotic complications in this COVID patients. Next. So let's go back to the basic of Virchow's triad. So it's a triad of a stasis of blood, hypercoagulability, and a vessel wall injury or dysfunction. So when you have these three, actually you have thrombosis anywhere in the body, and this is a very old concept. Now, when you apply this to the COVID patients, what happens? When these patients come to the hospital, usually the guys who are admitted are elderly people. They are usually immobile for a long time, and this leads to stasis of blood. What is very important here is extensive or very major cytokine storm, which is manifested in terms of biomarkers, very high levels of IL-6, CRP, and D-dimer. And this leads to the vessel injury and dysfunction. Also, it exposes the ACE2 receptors on the endothelium where the COVID virus comes and attaches. And all this leads to a hypercoagulable state. And this together leads to thrombosis everywhere in the body, not only in the veins leading to VTE, but also in the arteries. And these are smaller arteries of the heart, brain, as well as lower limb. Next, please. Again, the same thing, you have a cytokine storm which leads to endothelial dysfunction. This is manifested by increased IL-6, increased PAI-1, and decreased TPA, and this leads to thrombosis. So what happens here, the concept here is when you have this increased prothrombotic state, this exceeds the body's inherent tissue plasminogen activator activity, and this imbalance leads to thrombosis. So from this, a lot of concept has arrived that in these patients, you should anticoagulate these patients and sometimes even give TPA or thrombolytic agents to these patients right when they are symptomatic or when they are admitted to the hospital. So I'm going to be talking about this little later on. Next, please. Again, it's the same slide with a little different points. So the risk factors for thrombosis in COVID are acute illness, bedridden patients, fever, and sometimes they present with diarrhea and sepsis, so they are dehydrated, and they often have liver injury, CKD, COPD, heart failure, and malignancy as a background because they are usually old patients who are admitted. And there is an extensive inflammatory response in the body. I've already highlighted that. This leads to pulmonary microthrombi, intravascular coagulopathy, myocardial injury, and increased cardiac biomarkers. So here we have increased the D-dimers and decreased platelets and increased fibrinogen degradation products and increased prothrombin time. So these are the normal findings. But many a times it's not uncommon to have raised tropies, and all raised tropies are not myocardial infarction in COVID patients. So this is because of myocardial injury related to COVID infection per se and microvascular thrombosis. This all clinically it presents as venous thromboembolic disease, myocardial infarction, and disseminated intravascular coagulation and stroke. So when a lot of thrombosis happens in the body, the patient actually starts bleeding because of consumption coagulopathy. Next, please. Now, there has been different, observational studies and these have actually studied if you have a critically ill patient and if you have VTE prophylaxis, you actually have less incidence of VTE as compared to patients who did not have VTE prophylaxis. Next, please. So, what happened with all these, findings and observations? An international collaborative consensus document was prepared, and here it was the COVID-19 and thrombosis summary from International Collaborative Consensus document. And this was the main lead author here was Dr. Venu Deli, and he's from the Columbia University Irving Medical Center. Next, please. And here the consensus was, this was formed by a group of international collaborative societies, and there were different outlines, subheading, literature review, synthesis of subheadings and headings, and then consensus, which was tested with Delphi method. Next, please. And this was the article which was published in the Journal of American College of Cardiology. And this is a very recent article, so you can see how many authors are there. And this was endorsed by the International Society of Thrombosis and Hemostasis, the North American Thrombosis Forum, the European Society of Vascular Medicine, and the International Union of Angiology, and was supported by the ESC Working Group on Pulmonary Circulation and Right Ventricular Function. Next, please. So most of my would be based on this paper. So what we see here is when you have patients of COVID, they could be absolutely asymptomatic, or they could be mildly symptomatic, or they could be moderately symptomatic or severely symptomatic and leading to death. The patients who are asymptomatic are usually much larger in number, and the patients who are severely symptomatic requiring hospitalization are much less in number. And this we know that almost 85% of the patients would not require hospitalization. But of the patients who require hospitalization, if you see their, their cohort, they will be elderly, they will be more bedridden, and they would have more comorbidities. And here, these patients who are admitted, even with mild COVID infection, should have COVID prophylaxis if it is not contraindicated. So this has been a very, very strong recommendation in this article, which was published last month in JACC. Next, please. This is a very congested slide, so I'm not going to be talking much about it, but I'll give you the gist about it. It is the select summary of thrombosis and thromboembolic events during the viral outbreaks. It not only covers the COVID-19, but it also compares it with the influenza, Middle East, the MERS virus infection, and also the SARS virus infection. So what we find here, even if you compare the different types of viral epidemics which happened, the risk of venous thromboembolism and arterial thrombosis was there in every viral epidemic, but it is far, far more in this COVID-19 as compared to the previous epidemics. So once we know this, then how do we prevent? The suggested consideration for prevention and management of thrombosis among hospitalized patients with COVID-19. What we do is first the risk stratification of VTE, and this should be performed in all in-house patients with COVID-19. And in the absence of any contraindications, all in-house patients, especially patients with severe COVID who are critically ill, should receive prophylactic anticoagulation. The optimal intensity of anticoagulation remains unknown because it is still something new, and there have been different trials which have been initiated to actually find the optimal doses. What we also see is there is a pattern of hemostatic derangements in these patients, which includes elevated D-dimer levels. And this is very common in patients with COVID-19 who are admitted. And there was not enough sufficient evidence for routine screening for VTE by ultrasound or computed tomography or pulmonary angiography. It is not really required because in most of the cases, these sort of complications occur and they occur in a smaller vessel. It is much better to treat these rather than to take these patients for this, the diagnostic test, not only which could be very demanding and could also be increasing the infectivity in the hospital and may not yield what we want to see. So, but the clinical index of suspicion should be very high in these patients, and if you have elevated D-dimers in the presence of increased prothrombin time and thrombocytopenia and clinically symptomatic COVID who is admitted, this patient should be having anticoagulation therapy. And also the risk, please go back, risk stratification for VTE, please go back, should also be done for hospitalized patient at the time of discharge. What was recommended is that they have this prothrombotic state even after discharge for about 1.5 months, and they should be considered as high risk of VTE, and these patients should be anticoagulated even at the time of discharge for another coming 6 weeks, next week. So we can skip this. I've already, elaborated here. But what is important is, especially in Western countries, now you have different types of anticoagulation regime. In the hospital, you can give unfractionated heparin, low molecular weight heparin, or thrombolytic therapy, or even what you can give is vitamin K antagonist or NOACs. Now, there are different subsets. Vitamin K antagonist is contraindicated because of a drug-drug interaction with remdesivir or other antiviral drugs. If the patient is on, has a prosthetic heart valve and is admitted with severe COVID, those are tricky situations. And here we do not give vitamin K antagonist, but we tend to give heparin, but after discharge, most of these patients will have vitamin K antagonist. It is also not preferable because it requires a lot of INR, PD-INR testing, which are required very frequently in these patients. And these are not very practical in settings now in India, and also very common. In US and Europe, it is very, very difficult to actually do this anticoagulation and PD-INR for these patients. So except for patients who have prosthetic heart valves, the NOACs are preferable, both pre-discharge as well as post-discharge. And within the hospitalization, it is an unfractionated heparin or low molecular weight heparin which is preferred. Next, please. Again, this is the same very busy slide giving you similar sort of comparison. But if you can see here, there are special subset of patients. Now, what do you do in a patient who has a PCI is on dual antiplatelet and is presented with severe COVID. So here you need to anticoagulate patients and put them in dual antiplatelet therapy, or you put them on single antiplatelet therapy and anticoagulation. Also, we have to consider drug-drug interaction, which I've talked many times. And it is also seen here that if you have a if you have a patient, please go next. If you have a patient with COVID and stroke, please go next. What should be the management and ACS? What should be the management in these patients vis-a-vis dual antiplatelet therapy, anticoagulation, and thrombolytic therapy? Now, I'm not going to be touching much on this. These are public health and societal considerations, especially in patients who are on VKA, and that is why the VKAs are not preferred over NOACs in these patients, especially patients who are on VKA therapy are shifted to NOACs because, one, it is not practical to do PTINR because of they cannot be very, they can't have the diet and dietary restrictions which were there in non-COVID times. And there is a different impacts of lockdown at the level of healthcare workers, at the level of patients, domiciliary treatment, and also at the level of these testing. Next, please. Next. Again, I've given you the gist of this busy slide, so I'm going to be skipping this. Next. What next? What is seen in that slide, one thing which was important is that many of these patients actually have very severe thrombotic states. Very few actually present with clinical DIC and bleeding. It is not that it is not there, but very few actually present with that. Most of them would present with extensive thrombosis and not with consumption coagulopathy. Now, because of so many things happening, Sahil Parekh and Ajay Kirtane actually, they started a trial, which is the Improved COVID trial, which is intermediate or prophylactic dose anticoagulation for venous and arterial thromboembolism in severe COVID-19. It is a cluster-based randomized selection trial. So these are more of the dosing trials, because we do not know. We know that we need to give anticoagulation both for hospitalized patient and also for prophylactic, pre-hospitalization and post-hospitalization. We do not know the exact dose. So there has been a trial which has very, very recently been initiated. We do not know how far they have enrolled, how many they have enrolled, but soon we would have an idea what is the right dose and right regime for anticoagulation. Pending that time, the different centers have different ways and protocols to actually treat and give the anticoagulation therapy. Next, please. So let me just take you to different protocols now across the world. So this is the protocol from the university hospitals at Cleveland Clinic Center, and have the protocols changed or not? Next, please. So here, what is recommended is again what I've told you: change NOACs, vitamin K antagonist to NOACs wherever possible. If you are on vitamin K, instead of 4 weekly testing, make it 6 weekly, and whenever restrict the use of vitamin K antagonist only to patients who have prosthetic heart valves and have been on this for a very long time. Next, please. And also, again, the Cleveland Clinic also reports that the DIC seems to be less common. The extensive thrombotic complications are more common. ICU thrombosis remains a problem. And there has been, what I told you, the same observation that there has been a lot of clotting and thrombotic complications of the lines which have been there. Bleedings are rare in these patients. And the COVID ICU meeting should also be done as a weekly meeting. Next, please. So again, based on these observations, the Mayo Cleveland Clinic also came out with the important, health notification, which was published in the Washington Post, of a mysterious blood clotting complication, which is killing these corona patients, and it is not the respiratory events which are killing these corona patients. So this has now been more and more known all over the world, and that is why it is seen it is not only the thrombosis in major vessel, it is at both micro and macro level. I have shown you the slides from the autopsy specimen that it happens at the very small micro level as well as at the macro level. And there has to be, although the awareness for coagulopathy came late, it is also of profound importance when the patient has a neurologic or renal involvement. Next, please. So our ignorance was profound, but now at least the wisdom has dawned, and we need to be treating these patients as early as possible by 2 targeted regimens which I will be talking about. So let's go to the data. This is the clinical characteristics of coronavirus disease 2019. This was an article published from China, and this is for the China Medical Treatment Expert Group for COVID-19. They have seen, they have analyzed 1,099 patients at 522 hospitals. And the patients here which were enrolled had D-dimer of more than 0.5 milligram per liter, and 46% of these patients had raised D-dimers. And of what was seen here is 43% who has raised had a non-severe COVID disease, 60% had severe COVID disease, and go next, please. And what was seen here is the prothrombin time was prolonged in all these patients. Next, please. And the D-dimer was raised. Now let's understand a little bit about D-dimer. It is a fragment of the cross-linked fibrin degradation. So the concept is when you have more thrombosis, you have more fibrin, cross-linking in the thrombus. And when you have more fibrin, which is there, what happens is there is a natural process which is initiated, and this leads to degradation of fibrin. So this represents more fibrin degradation product means there is extensive thrombosis in the body because of the activation of inherent fibrinolysis. And this is considered to be relatively non-specific, and that means it is not specific for thromboembolism, but a raised D-dimer could be there without thromboembolism. But what it definitely signifies is that there is extensive thrombosis in the body. These patients are high risk for stroke, for pulmonary embolism, for myocardial infarction, and peripheral limb ischemia. So this is very, very important at this point. Again, I'm re-emphasizing that D-dimer, high risk D-dimer in COVID patient does not mean or strongly correlates with pulmonary embolism. And a raised tropi does not mean always that it is a myocardial infarction. Next, please. So I've already talked about this. So again, the patient may present with MI, ALI, stroke, or pulmonary thromboembolism. Next, please. And central lines which are talked. Next, so this is a detail of the same study. Next, please. So what were the key points in this Chinese study? That routine VTE prophylaxis was not employed in most of these patients. And that is why the risk of death was more. When this was compared with the patients in Netherlands, there was thrombosis despite prophylaxis, and therefore it was thought that maybe the adjusted doses of thromboprophylaxis was important, not that one dose was important for all patients. Next, please. Now, this is another very interesting slide. What it shows here is, if you see patients who were heparinized and who were not heparinized, what you see here, the patients who were heparinized had lower complications and lower death as compared to patients who were not, heparinized in these studies. Next, please. So this came as a very strong evidence, next, please. Positive evidence that patients who were who had heparin, those patients did much better in terms of morbidity, ICU stay, need for ICU ventilation, and also in terms of mortality. So whenever we have a patient, the recommendation was that we should have a PT, APTT, D-dimer, fibrinogen level, and also serum ferritin level. And if you have a elevated fibrinogen and D-dimer, you have more than 1,000% risk and to stratify these patients to poor outcome. And this may be parameter for admission. So if you have a patient who does not appear to be very sick but has a raised D-dimer, this patient is at a very high risk of complication and should be admitted ASAP and should be anticoagulated. Next, please. So again, this is it is sort of an algorithm based on the same finding that if you have a raised D-dimer, prothrombin time, low platelets, and fibrinogen level, you actually triage these patients, and if fibrinogen level is less than 2 grams per liter, you admit these patients, and if it is more than 2 grams per liter, you may actually observe these patients, and if they deteriorate, you may admit them, otherwise you can treat them on in a ward setting or an OPD setting, but you have to treat this patient with anticoagulation. Next, please. So again, let me not go to this busy slide, but again, let me give you few second points here. That all hospitalized patients should receive pharmacological prophylaxis according to the risk stratification. We do not know the dose, but we must use our common sense to give them proper prophylaxis. If the creatinine clearance is more than 30, low molecular weight heparin is preferred, with increased dosing considered in patients more than 100 kg. So, more than 100 kg, you must give at least the double dose of Hexane or enoxaparin and 5 milligram of fondaparin. In patients with creatinine clearance less than 30 ml per minute, you should go for unfractionated heparin in BID or TID doses. And a regular monitoring of prothrombin time, D-dimer, fibrinogen, and platelet count is important, and LDH is important in these patients and should be done 2 to 3 times every week. And in patients in ICU, large increase in D-dimer, severe inflammatory markers, hepatic and renal and respiratory failure, these patients should immediately have therapeutic doses of low molecular weight heparin or unfractionated heparin. And this should be adjusted according to bleeding phase. Some centers are aggressive. They may even consider thrombolizing these patients. Next, please. So let's just skip this. We have done this. Again, let's skip this. We have already talked about it. Now, the question is, how long does this prothrombotic state last? We do not know, but what it has been seen is 45 days. And that is why there is a rationale that we should discharge patients with 45 days of anticoagulation therapy unless contraindicated. Does it associate with intermediate and late-term decompensation? We are currently relying on surrogate and lab data. I think it does. Which drugs are best? The NOACs are better than VKA, and low molecular weight and heparin are equally good. And sometimes thrombolytic agents are also used. How long do we continue anticoagulation in patients with thromboembolic events? We continue for 6 weeks post hospitalization. How well will unfractionated heparin work with acute inflammation? We do not know much about it, but we follow the patient. The recommendation is that we follow the patients according to the according to the APTT in these patients, or an ECT, which we keep around 2.5 times. And then what is the best discharge regimen? Again, the best discharge regimen is low molecular weight heparin in our country, but maybe in Western countries where the patients do not use the injection by themselves, this may be a problem. Then these patients should be put on NOACs. And if patients are on prosthetic heart valve, they may go for vitamin K antagonist. Otherwise, it is advisable to be avoided in most of the settings. Next, please. What not to do in COVID-19? We have to know that VTE is the third most common cardiovascular disease after MI and stroke, and routine screening with patients of DVT in COVID patient is not warranted. As it is, we know in these patients, we need to have prophylaxis. But in young stroke patients with no additional risk factor, we must do PMRs and we must suspect a COVID infection. The young patients can actually come and present with acute MI, myocardial failure, or not with stroke. Next is, there is some sound coming back on my ear. Now, NOACs, we do not know what dose, because what we have is that one dose fits all, but that may not be true in COVID patients. Again, in clinically vascular failures, following interventions for iliofemoral DVT and endothelial injury and inflammatory mediated events, we do not know what is the right dose. We again do not know what is the right dose of NOACs in morbid obesity. And if there is, like vitamin K antagonist, if there is any interaction with lopinavir or ritonavir, and in those sort of cases, it should be avoided. Next, please. So there are a lot of things, and we do not know everything about NOACs. But what we know that these NOACs have drug-drug interaction with antiviral drugs which we are using. So the guidelines are that we should have a team-driven recommendations for anticoagulation. Next, please. And we should be very, very proactive in treating these patients with anticoagulation. Next, please. So I'll just give you a case, a representative case of 49 years old male admitted after 5 days of fever, progressive shortness of breath. Now the patient is obese, BMI is 38, has diabetes, on insulin, and has mild CKD stage 2. And he presents with heart rate of 98, systolic pressure of 134 by 88, and respiratory rate of 24, saturation of 84, and he requires 2 liters of oxygen to raise his saturation to 94%. There is no leg swelling. The D dimer is 8.4, normal being less than 0.5. Chest X-ray shows bilateral patchy infiltrates. And on pulmonary CT shows no pulmonary embolism, but bilateral ground glass opacities and consolidations in the right upper lobe and lower lobe. He's admitted to the general ward. Next, please. In this patient, how do we estimate his risk of VTE, and what VTE prophylaxis should we use in these patients? Next, please. Now, these were the questions. On day 4, his oxygen requirement rapidly increased from 2 liters to 6 liters. He was transferred to ICU for high flow oxygen. He developed acute and chronic renal insufficiency, and the creatinine clearance went down to less than 30 ml per minute. And then he was put on standard unfractionated heparin. Do we change the VTE prophylaxis at this stage? Next, please. So, is there any opinion of the panel? Okay. So after 3 days in the ICU, his oxygen requirement improved. He was no longer febrile. He was transferred to the floor with continuing oxygen, which was lean, and renal function started improving. And eventually, he was discharged on day 10, but he still required 0.5 to 1 liter of oxygen. His renal functions actually, sort of normalized, and D dimer was 2.5 again, more than normal. And was this again? Do you consider post-hospital VTE prophylaxis? So we have already discussed the answers here. In first instance, the patient was put on low molecular weight heparin, and when the creatinine clearance went down to less than 30, we shifted the patient to unfractionated heparin. And then at the time of discharge, with normalization of renal function, we want to discharge these patients on VTE prophylaxis, but we can use low molecular weight heparin or NOACs. Next. Okay, so I would, do you have next after this also? I would tend to stop here, but I had more slides. Just go next if you have a slide here. Okay. So these are more slides. This is what is recommended as per the literature. Now there have been centers who have been even more active. This is from Mount Sinai COVID-19 anticoagulation algorithm. And what you see here is patients who have high oxygen, who are admitted with moderate to severe COVID, and they have high oxygen requirement, raised D-dimers, raised creatinine, and raised CRP. These patients are admitted to ICU, and they are put on heparin, which is either standard heparin or enoxaparin, and they may be considered for TPA, which is a thrombolytic therapy, in case the patients are deteriorating or requiring rapidly requiring ventilatory support. These patients are thrombolized. Now, if not, if the patient is high risk and is not admitted in ICU, and that means the patient is not clinically that sick, these patients are put on either apixaban twice a day or enoxaparin. So again, they go to NOACs right from the time of admission, or they go for thrombolytic therapy. So this is, and these patients are discharged. When they are discharged on rivaroxaban in many patients, and otherwise standard NOACs. So they could be discharged on apixaban, rivaroxaban, or from April 9, 2020. So Mount Sinai has revised their anticoagulation profile. Again, I'm not going. I've discussed all these parameters. What is the rationale of early anticoagulation and thrombolytic therapy? What is the rationale of choice of anticoagulant? And what is the definition of high risk for progression to ICU? Again, I'm going to give you the same markers. If you have timers, if you have falling, platelet counts, and if you have high ferritin, high LDH, and if you require oxygen, your saturation is less than 90%, and if you require more than 4 liters of oxygen. These are poor signs of poor prognosis and early ventilation and prolonged ventilation, and rapid transfer to ICU settings. Next, please. Now, this is again a study from, I'm just going to give you some recent original article. This is from China. And this is an article on anticoagulation treatment, whether anticoagulation treatment is associated with decreased mortality in severe COVID disease with coagulopathy. Next, please. And what it clearly signifies is that patients, this was the final, findings. They had 1,786 consecutive patients with COVID-19 entering Tongji Hospital. Out of this, 1261 were classified as mild to moderate, 76 met the criteria of exclusion, and 449 were classified as severe COVID-19 patients. Of these, 99 were heparinized for 7 days or longer, 350 were without heparin and were treated for or had heparin for less than 7 days. If you see the two groups, next please, there were 30 deaths in the first group and 109 deaths in the second group where heparin was not given. Now, if you see, this is the paired bar diagram which depicts the blue one is heparin users and red is non-heparin users. And if you see the 28-day mortality clearly is significantly higher across the group when the heparin was not given as compared to when heparin was given during hospitalization. Next, please. Next.
That's it.
Okay, that's it. So now, so we have data from China, we have data from US, we have data from UK. Now we have discussed and data from Mount Sinai and Cleveland. We have discussed how the whole concept of having more thrombosis in these patients came in, both by clinical observation by intensivist and autopsy findings, and how this was then synthesized. There was a global interactive meeting, and there was a paper which came out and got published about a month back in JACC. and so the global consensus, and what were the rationale and what were the conclusions and recommendations derived from there, and how a new trial, a dosing trial, has been initiated by by Dr. Parikh and Ajay Kirtane, and we would be very eager to know the results of this trial for proper dosing of these patients. What are the determinants of poor prognosis? What are the determinants of more thrombotic complications and anticoagulations? And what was why and what anticoagulants are to be used and for how long they are to be used. So this is, in summary, what I have discussed. I'll be very happy to have the panel discussion so that we can elaborate more on these points and come to better conclusions, especially in our country where our risk is much more higher of these thromboembolic complications.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khanna, for a very enlightening lecture. Now, basically, I would say that there are three main take-home messages that all of us should take. I mean, this has opened an entirely new chapter that we were wondering, we were thinking earlier that main mortality is because of ARDS and pneumonia, but this is a new chapter of coagulopathy. And especially in China or anywhere, I mean, patient when he is prone, when he is on ventilator and then in ICU, I mean, we cannot move him to for the CTPA and do the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. But in France, Paris, we have a data where even the OPD patients, half of the patients are OPD patients, and 18% of OPD patients also had pulmonary thromboembolism. As opposed to that earlier experience with H1N1 influenza, about 7% had venous thrombosis. So there is almost 3 times, almost 2.5 times higher incidence with COVID. So which raises this particular possibility more. So we should be very careful. We should be watchful. The moment D-dimer is more than 1 mic per ml, or this platelet count, whatever Dr. Khanna has very nicely enlightened, our antennas should go up and we should start thromboprophylaxis. Thromboprophylaxis, another very important take-home message that he has given is it should be for at least 6 weeks, 45 days after the for the post-COVID period also, which many times we forget. I mean, as soon as the patient starts walking, we stop thromboprophylaxis. So that was a very simple and important message that we got from him. And third important thing, which is still uncertain, I would say, is by thromboprophylaxis, even despite that we have seen in Italy and various other places that pulmonary embolism does occur, that venous thromboembolism does occur. So whether by improving the dose of low molecular weight heparin or vitamin K antagonist, are we going to be benefited? Still, we have to wait till Ajay Kirtane and Sahil Parikh's improve COVID reports and the world literature, and then we should have our Indian data also. Where we are going to have more and more number of cases, which will tell us about this in different doses and different regimens of thromboprophylaxis. Is it going to make any difference? So I think these are the 3 take-home messages that I have taken from this. And we have very excellent, brilliant panel. Dr. Jayagopal and Dr. Soumitra Rai is there. I will just request them to offer the comments from the chairs, from the chairman's side, and then we will open the discussion for question answer session. Dr. Soumitra or Dr. Jayagopal, any one of you, please open.
Sir, Sandeep here. Dr. Soumitra Rai had to got a little disconnections. He had some technical issues, right? So he just said that he will just try. So meanwhile, sir, certain questions are there in the chat box. If you can just kindly.
Yeah, Dr. Khanna, yeah, very enlightening talk, and I think you have covered the basic problem as rightly pointed out by our by Dr. Rajiv. When this really got introduced, I think people were more concerned this being a lung problem, and finally, I think its message is very loud and clear. The thromboembolic problem, which is really the major issue. I think there's a recent article which is it's actually in the proof of Jack. It's an article from Mount Sinai where they have a large number of patients, about 2,269 or so, and they have actually compared the. Dr. Rajiv, you are muted. So the good percentage of patients they had actually anticoagulated, and this is a study where they compared with those who are not anticoagulated, and the outcome has just come out that the mortality is clearly better in those patients who are anticoagulated. And more so, I think if you can identify those sick patients, particularly those patients on the ventilator, the only issue is that, and as you rightly pointed, all the parameters suggesting high D-dimer, the prothrombin time, low platelet count, all these parameters were all there. But then the only issue was a slightly increased bleeding rate, 3% versus 1.2%. This is close to about 2,000 patients. And I think they have clearly shown that there's a mortality benefit on patients on ventilators. So that is number one. Secondly, I think the message which we need to take from our country is that, all of us, when the initial lockdown was over, at least in our country, many of us felt that this is not really going to the levels that you would see in the US or in the Europe. But then when you see a patient with an acute thrombotic, whether it's a myocardial infarction or let's say a stroke, I think we need to have a word of caution for the physicians treating them. We need to really screen for this COVID. Today, unfortunately, we don't have the rapid, the RT-PCR assays which are available. So I think the clinical testing is very important. Maybe do as a screening, maybe a D-dimer and the basic stuff which we had already told. But then when any thrombotic situation, I think it's important. The question to Dr. Narendra Khanna will be, today I think maybe a week from now or 2 weeks from now, all the labs in the country will be rather permitted to do the antibodies test, because that's one thing which is going to, the Roche has come out with their kit, which is not going to be very expensive. The whole this thing will be less than $500. So suppose you have a patient with a myocardial infarction, you don't suspect a COVID, but then you have this antibody testing done, it turns out to be positive. Well, that patient is probably immune, but then will you suggest a thromboprophylaxis in this subset of patients? That's one question to you. And also, there have been reports where the anti-phospholipid levels have also been found to be very high in these patients. So that's another angle which has been coming into the prothrombotic situation. Just a couple of comments which came to my mind. I think the message is very loud and clear. You need to, once you have this high-risk group, anticoagulate them. And preferably, I think the agent of choice, which you had shown earlier on, which has been also come out in other studies, is probably rivaroxaban. I think apart from low molecular weight heparin or heparin, those patients with renal insufficiency.
Okay, Dr. Jayagopal, as it is, your questions are always very tricky. So now, if you have this, let's see the testing pattern. In India, I was listening while I was coming back from the hospital. Only about 1 crore 28 lakh testings have been done up till now, which is almost like 1%. And of that, we have got more than 128,000 cases as of now. If you extrapolate this to maybe in coming 3, 4, 5 months, and suppose everybody in the country was tested, and at least 50% of them were positive, so we are estimating a huge population. So at least say 100 times of what we have. If we have about 1 lakh patients, so we are talking about 1 crore patients at least who would be having tested COVID and coming with a positive COVID infection. So all of us are going to see this. Secondly, this is when you are doing an RT-PCR. If you are doing an antibody test, what we know is we are only testing high-risk patients, high-risk contacts, and patients who are symptomatic. If you actually see the trend in other countries, if you're doing antibody tests, they are going to pick up those 70-80% patients who never actually had infection or had a clinical infection and recovered. So that means they had an asymptomatic disease, but they were carrier and they have definitely had COVID at some stage. And this is more, that is why for screening the population rather than individual to actually know what is the prevalence in the community rather than in one individual. I do not know whether having a patient who had an antibody positive and his COVID RT-PCR is negative. That means again, when we are talking of antibody, it has to be the IgG antibodies which are high, which would actually say he had a past infection, and IgM would still signify that he could have a recent infection, and then he definitely needs a COVID testing. Now, as per the, I mean, if I extrapolate the findings of the paper and the other findings, is that the inflammation and the prothrombotic state continues for at least 6 weeks. So this patient, if we think that could be in the 6 weeks, we would like to give thromboprophylaxis to these patients definitely. The issue comes when we are doing the primary PCI and we are giving a dual antiplatelet, and now we have to add one more anticoagulant. Then we have to assess the risk of bleeding versus preventing a thromboembolic complication. And I believe the trend in such patients, it is very individual, is that we will shorten the DAPT and we would put them on maybe NOAC plus an aspirin or clopidogrel. So that could be one of the things, but if there is no contraindication and the risk is high, we would definitely give both as per the studies which we have now. Again, when I say this, it is always to be taken in consideration with the markers for inflammation. We would still look at D-dimers. We would still look at the platelet count. We will still look at the LDH and the ferritin levels, and IL-6 levels and CRP levels. If they are high, then we know that this patient has inflammation and there is a residual risk, a higher risk. Then these patients definitely I would give thromboprophylaxis in spite of the fact that the patient never had symptoms and the antibodies are positive. This will be my my way to go, but there are no recommendations which I found up to now in the literature. What would your take be on this, Dr. Jayagopal or Dr. Kannan?
Well, it's been always puzzling to me. See, the issue remains that somebody comes to you. For example, I had a guy who had a recent ACS positive and a very minimal disease. That's a pattern. When you look at, in fact, Shripal Bangalore, there was a good session. There, out of the 18 cases which they studied in New York City, they found that only 50% had a obstructive coronary artery disease. So likewise, you come to get to see this kind of patients, do an angio, you find that it's not an obstructive disease. And then, so the issue remains, if the antibody test is positive in these patients, I think there is definitely a role for a single antiplatelet agent and a NOAC or the thing for 6 weeks. I mean, that's my take. But then when you have a PCI done and a stent, it's a little tricky issue. The question is, could we add a vascular dose of rivaroxaban or whatever? That's the only thing which I would think about. But I would definitely think in terms of continuing with the data available. I think there's a prothrombotic state. But I think, as you rightly said, I would rely possibly on D-dimer more than, because it's a cheap investigation. And then down the line, that's also a prognostic factor these days. I think they recommend doing the D-dimer every 3 days when you have a COVID patient. So I think I would do it that way.
Yeah, that's true. And I actually couldn't answer that part of the question. 30 to 50% of acute MI, when you elevation MI, do not have a major obstructive coronary disease. They have disease distally or into the smaller vessel. Even there, the TROPA is also not, diagnostic. I mean, you may have many TROPA positive MIs, but you may actually not have an MI. It could just be an injury, myocardial injury because of myocarditis rather than MI. So this becomes a tricky situation. So I think, not answering this question, when you have ST elevation MI, there is more so an indication in this era, if you can thrombolize these patients, it would be a better strategy rather than taking them from primary PCI. So not only for safety of the cath lab workers and the patients, but also for the fact that 50% of these would not have a thrombus in the major coronary artery. They will have small thrombosis everywhere. Not only it makes the procedure safer, but it also covers that aspect of thrombotic strain of in acute MI. And if there are, because it's a thrombotic tendency, it also lowers the incidence of pulmonary thromboembolism and maybe stroke.
Dr. Khanna, I think I beg to differ there, because there's a brilliant thing there. If you have an ST elevation myocardial infarction sort of a picture, and then I think the stress these days is do a point of care ultrasound. And as you rightly said, the TROPS may not be markedly elevated in these patients. So if you do a echo and you don't find a significant regional wall motion abnormality, actually by doing a lysis, you are creating more bleeding tendency. In fact, the SKY recommendation also is, maybe it's worthwhile if you take all the precautions, do an angio, and then the idea of doing a lysis actually is when you find a regional wall motion abnormality on the echo. Otherwise, your lysis also is not required there, and you are probably creating more. In fact, this is one of the debates which came across in one of the sessions. So I think we perhaps would rely more on echo in these situations. ST elevation more like a myocardial injury, and then you might have only minimal disease there. You may not need even a lysis there. Again, the long-term implications is thromboprophylaxis. Again, coming back to the same point. Dr. Rajiv, your viewpoint?
Yeah, Jaiprakash, actually, you have raised this issue of MINOCA, the myocardial infarction with non-obstructive coronary artery disease. And in the setting of COVID, I mean, that MINOCA earlier was a different. Now we are talking about COVID and MINOCA. I mean, there is a distinctive possibility of still being this thrombotic event as a result of this endotheliitis or procoagulant state or something. So in these cases, I think unless and until we do angiography, it is very difficult. As you rightly said, echo, if it is uniform global hypokinesia, then we know it may be myopericarditis or myocarditis producing reduction in the ejection fraction. But if it is localized, then still I think unless and until we do angiography, we are not very sure. And if angio does show that it is MINOCA without any obstructive coronary artery disease with this COVID in background, I would go for single antiplatelet and this thing, low molecular weight heparin to begin with, subsequently followed by DOAC, NOAC or DOAC, whatever you call it. And then for, as Dr. Khanna has said, minimum 45 days, I would continue with that. And of course, antiplatelet to be continued even later on. Because I have not put a stent, so I can just continue with the antiplatelet. Dr. Jaiprakash?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much the same. I think all of us are thinking the same lines. But then the bottom line is that you need a baseline echo study also, as you rightly said, to rule out a global LV dysfunction. Or if you find a significant region, if it corresponds well with the STEMI, I think the SKY recommendation also is you still have to take them up for a primary PCI. But then if it's only a MINOCA sort of a thing, then I think then the focus is more on thromboprophylaxis. I think that's what we would gain by an angiogram. But I think as rightly pointed out, there's always a risk of your healthcare workers getting the problem. But then what to do? I think myocardial infarction will kill a patient. The COVID, the mortality is 3%. STEMI, if you don't treat them well, you might lose 10% of the patients. So I think it's a trade-off.
But I think we are understanding again that thrombolytic therapy is not a bad therapy, and yes. So if you will be ready, but as a primary strategy, at least most in our country, to save our workers, and I think unless the patient is in shock or has a contraindication, and early early thrombolysis may be a good idea. At least I'm talking about not part of the country. Kerala is a very different state where things are very, very well organized, and you are actually going to see this much before anybody else in the country, because there are no new cases I hear in Kerala now, and your antibody patients coming with antibody positive and not having any history would be seen more and more first in Kerala and then other parts of the country. Other parts of the country, we are expecting a much more rise every day. Maybe after the 30th, it will be in Delhi. It is lockdown. Do you see any lockdown on the streets?
Yeah. Dr. Khanna, there were two questions from the audience that, both more or less similar. Patient is already on aspirin and clopidogrel combination, which many of our patients are. And then he has developed with this, probably I think he means in the COVID status, he has developed either brain stroke or myocardial infarction. How would you go about it? Would you come down on DAPT to SAPT and then give anticoagulant, or you continue with both aspirin, clopidogrel and continue with DOAC or low molecular weight heparin? So what is your take on that? Stroke and MI.
Again, Again, it depends what you are doing. For stroke, it is simple. For stroke, it is simple, it depends when the stroke comes. If you have a patient on dual antiplatelet, has a stroke, embolic stroke, comes within in the window period in the first 2 hours, definitely anybody would do would be either a lysis, intracranial lysis, or mechanical thrombectomy. But if it comes later on, or if there is already an established infarct, then thrombolysis is allowed, because it actually leads to higher incidence of brain hemorrhage and transformation of stroke, hemorrhagic transformation. So then we will just continue on dual antiplatelet. Now, if the patient is coming with acute myocardial infarction, again, we will probably have the same approach. If a patient of COVID on dual antiplatelets has an acute myocardial infarction, I would utilize first. But many people can take it as a primary and primary PCI is a good option. Later on, these patients, if it is a active COVID, should be put on low molecular weight at least. And maybe after a few weeks, at about 6 weeks, 3 weeks, if it is too necessary, about 6 weeks, they should have dual antiplatelets. Then it depends whether suppose the patient had a DVT as well, he requires an anticoagulation, we may discontinue one of the antiplatelet and continue with additional one. Because it is not uncommon to have these patients having DVT also. It would stay there and be a risk for thromboembolic events.
Dr. Khanna, there is another question that anticoagulation is whether it is needed by each and everybody who is having RT-PCR positive, and if you want to start it, at what stage you will start it? Is it, what is too early, what is too late, or when it is optimal to start?
So if you remember the slide which I showed you of a pyramid, if the patient is symptomatic, those patients need anticoagulation. And again, the symptomatic could be mildly symptomatic, moderately symptomatic, and severely symptomatic. Mild ones are at home, moderate ones are usually in the hospital, in the wards, and severe ones are requiring. No ambiguity that you will start as the patient is hospitalized for any degree of COVID, you will start you will start anticoagulation. It could be low molecular weight heparin standard, or it could be NOAC. But if the patient is getting into a stage of or is on a ventilator or deteriorating, there is also a rationale of increasing your dose or thrombolyzing these patients or putting them on as you have seen on the Mount Sinai algorithm and recommendation, also in the Cleveland thrombolyze the patient if the patient gets into the ICU.
Yeah, I think we had really excellent discussion, Dr. Khanna, very enlightening lecture. Actually, we missed Dr. Soumitra, his comments. He's probably not there. Otherwise, we would have had some really good comments as well. Dr. Jayaprakash commented very well. There are still quite a few questions, but I think 9:30 was the cutoff time. So I think let us call it a day. And I really thank Dr. Khanna, Dr. Jayagopal, Dr. Soumitra, and Sandeep for the entire Mankind team who organized this conference. A lot of thanks to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sandeep.
Thank you so much. It was such exhilarating and such as enlightening sessions. Thank you, Dr. Khanna, for enlightening us. Such a nice topic, which is of current context. We received a lot of positive feedbacks, in fact, on the other portals, right? And a lot of discussions. The discussion was so nice and fruitful. Thank you so much. Thanks to Dr. Jayagopal for wonderful chairing of the sessions. Thanks to Dr. Rajiv Karnik sir for such a wonderful chairing of the discussions. And in fact, this sessions was live, and as you all know, and we have almost more than 3,000 consultant physicians have attended and logged in these sessions across the country, right? So thank you so much. Thanks once again, right? And with this, we call it for the day, right?
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Thank you, Dr. Jayagopal, Dr. Karnik. And I'm sorry for the change the internet. And thank you so very much for showing my slides from your end, because I think there was a problem. going for the screen share, it was just cutting off.
Yeah, sometimes it happens on the digital. These are some technical issues, right? Thank you once again. Thank you so
Okay.
much, sir. Good night. Stay
Good night.
safe.
Good night.
Right.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Good night.